Thurgood Marshall has harried defenders of segregation into courtroom after courtroom, from the unfriendly territory of the Deep South to the austere marble chambers of the Supreme Court. In May of 1954, Marshall won his most important case when the Supreme Court decided that racial integration in American schools, racial segregation in American schools, was a violation of the Constitution. The 57-year-old Baltimore-born lawyer has had 19 years of unmatched legal experience with the NAACP. Though he's pursued his cases with vigor, he has not let passion cloud his briefs. Lawyers who opposed Marshall on various desegregation battles give him this kind of professional praise. He is an able lawyer and a skillful advocate. He was courteous, he did not rant or rave, and he asked good questions. Let's see if we now can ask some good questions of Thurgood Marshall. Mr. Marshall, your place as a leader in the fight against racial prejudice is firmly established, as I have detailed. I'd like to ask you just about a couple of the things that you've come to believe in that fight. First of all, have you ever met a man who had no race prejudice?
No, I've met many men that make every effort not to have it. But I would imagine that most men have some deep-seated prejudice of some sort. I would say that could mention 100 or more people that I would be firmly convinced had none. Actually had none because they had removed it from their minds over a period of years.
I see. Do you have, in your own mind, any prejudice, any resentment whatsoever against whites?
Not as such.
What do you mean by
Against individuals, yes. But being brought up in a completely segregated atmosphere in Baltimore, Maryland, by the time I reached maturity, I would say that I did have considerable prejudice in my mind. Since that time, I have found it wise and indeed sensible to take people on their merits rather than prejudge them.
When you say you had considerable prejudice, prejudice-based, resentment-based on what? On the economic superiority, on the social superiority of the people whom you felt were...
Well, when you live in a segregated community, you find that one group has everything and the other group has little, if anything. And you, as a result of being shunted around, you more or less get the idea that something's wrong. You find out later that it's not the individual, it's the system under which the individuals of both groups come up.
Of course, when you progress within that system yourself, it's easier to shed that original resentment.
I think there's no problem there at all. I remember, for example, as late as my third year in college, I helped debate on a team against the Harvard Liberal Club. And in Boston, I felt very uncomfortable in a mixed restaurant. It had been my first experience, and then I was in my third year of college.
Do you never feel uncomfortable in a mixed restaurant today?
No.
Never?
No.
In no matter what city?
No. I'll find individuals that are unpleasant, but I find individuals of both races that are unpleasant.
Are you in favor of interracial marriage?
I have no feeling one way or the other. I think it's a purely private matter up to the individual. I am convinced that the laws against intermarriage are unlawful and unconstitutional. But as to intermarriage itself, I have no feeling one way or the other. I think it's up to the individual.
Do you think that socially interracial marriage, not just now or tomorrow, but over a period of 50, 100, 500 years, is inevitable?
I don't think it's necessarily inevitable, and I don't think anybody can predict one way or the other. If I can be facetious, I like to say that I believe that any man has the right to marry any woman he wants to marry if she's willing to marry him, with one exception. That's my wife.
Let's turn now to some criticisms of the NAACP.
There are plenty.
Well, I'd like to read an excerpt from an open letter to the North, written by Nobel Prize winner William Faulkner, Life magazine, March 5, 1956. Mr. Faulkner says, I would say to the NAACP and all the organizations who would compel immediate and unconditional integration, go slow now. Stop now for a time, a moment. You have the power now. You can afford to withhold for a moment the use of it as a force. Give the white Southerner a space to get his breath. to see that he faces an obsolescence in his own land which only he can cure, a moral condition which not only must be cured, but a psychological condition which has got to be cured if the white Southerner is to have any peace. Now, I tried to read it with the feeling, or some of the feeling, that I'm sure that Mr. Faulkner had when he wrote it. How do you feel about what William Faulkner says there?
Well, in the first place, Mr. Faulkner is not original at all. The newspapers in Virginia have suggested that the NAACP go fishing for a reasonable time, and it's the real fallacy in Mr. Faulkner's reasoning is that this is something new. Desegregation has been coming about over a period of 20 or more years. When Mr. Faulkner or anyone else says wait, you must bear in mind that Negroes in this country have been waiting since 1863 when the Emancipation Proclamation was put forth. We've been waiting since the 14th Amendment was adopted. As a matter of fact, I would say that the NAACP's more reasonable criticism is that we're moving too slow. I don't believe it's a question of not moving too slow or moving too rapidly. I can't conceive of the reason in asking not that we slow down, but that we actually stop.
Well, Mr. Marshall, I'm sure that you understand, or maybe I understand more than is implicit in what Mr. Faulkner says, but it seems to me what he's saying is this. You say that it's been standing still for a long time, and it has. But the fact that the Supreme Court decision was handed down in 1954 all of a sudden changed the whole complexion of the situation. And the Southerners he is suggesting, has to have time to digest the impact of this.
I agree.
But that if you force, what he is saying, that if you force too closely upon the swallowing of the Supreme Court decision, I don't mean to carry this analogy to absurd lengths, you're going to give a case of moral indigestion to the South.
Well, the real question, Mr. Wallace, is if you take a situation where segregation has been considered legal for at least since 1896, and now it's illegal. The real problem is twofold, and I, for one, recognize it in the South of the good. I'm not talking about the politician. I'm talking about the good citizen. He's up against the proposition of changing his mores and customs. That I recognize. But bear in mind that we in the NAACP are not for changing. We are merely for taking the laws off of the statute books so that the white and Negro people in town A or B in the South can work out their problem in whatever time period they want to work it out in.
Well, now you say so that they can work out their problem, you mean that they can sit down and work this problem out together?
Sit down around the table, the people of both races, and not decide as to whether or not they'll desegregate. That's been decided. But when and how?
When and how?
That's they could do.
Virginius Dabney, editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, is a man who is at least somewhat sympathetic to integration, is he not? At least somewhat.
Not to integration. Mr. Dabney, I've known him now since 1935. He's been a very good liberal. He was one of the committee members of the Southern Editors Against Lynching. But Mr. Dabney has been opposed to integration and has been in favor of segregation at least as long as I've known him. He's never been for breaking down segregation except on buses.
Except on buses?
Buses and transportation.
Not in the schools?
Not in the schools. He never has been.
Well, when you say that, when you talk about the necessity for white and Negro to sit down together in view of the Supreme Court decision to work things out, Dabney says that the NAACP stands in the way. In the United States News and World Report, March 15th of this year, Dabney charges as follows. He says, until a few years ago, it was the most natural thing for white and colored leaders to sit down together and discuss mutual problems. These things are no longer true. The two races have been driven apart by arguments over segregation. The NAACP leaders have committed all Negroes to integration so that any white who dissents is stigmatized as the enemy of the Negro. The tragic fact is, he goes on, is that there is hardly any liaison now remaining between the two races in the South. What is your opinion of the Dabney charge, then?
Well, I think Mr. Dabney, I can't say exactly for Mr. Dabney himself, but the NAACP did not bring this about. Is the other newspaper in Richmond, I think they're owned by the same outfit, the Richmond News Leader. I think that's the name of it. On a day or so after the decision came down, in a long editorial, called on the people of Virginia to fight against integration with all of their power, to litigate for over 100 years if necessary. That was said long before the NAACP even opened its mouth about it. I don't believe that he's correct that everything that's happened in the South can be laid. I know everybody needs a whipping boy, but it's not going to be solved by charges and countercharges. If Mr. Dabney wants a group of citizens to sit down, responsible citizens of Virginia, he can get together a group of citizens and he won't need the NAACP, and the NAACP couldn't, if they wanted, to stop it.
Mr. Marshall, do you feel the NAACP speaks for the majority of Negroes in the United States?
Factually, we could not say that. We only represent, so far as membership is concerned, around 350,000.
Out of a total of around 16 million?
Around 16 million. That's not even close. Well, on the other hand, we do believe that we are the one organization that speaks the language that the average Negro and American who believes in democracy would have us speak.
Well, how in the world can you say a thing like that if you have only 350,000 members, and a good many of them, I dare say, are white? If you have only 350,000 members out of 16 million Negroes in the United States, how do you know that you're speaking for them, and why have you not been able to recruit more Negroes to the side, to membership in the NAACP?
A very good question. The NAACP is supported by groups like the Negro Baptists, or matter of fact, every church group. We are supported by the Negroes in the trade union movement. We are supported by more millions of Negroes than any outfit I can name. The committee we have that works with us, I would say, represents around 10 or 12 million. While they're not members.
They're not individual dues-paying members?
They're not individual dues-paying members, but these organizations, you take in the Deep South, when you get the Negro Baptists and the Negro Methodists, and I'm neither Baptist nor Methodist, so I can say it with good conscience, you have practically all of the Negroes in the South.
And there's a hard right to the job. And Blue Farmer's block is knocked off.
The one reason I started TVDAYS.com was to have a place to post my videos and the films that I've been restoring.
Stomach's jumping, and I'll feel worse tomorrow.
Ideals Robot Commando.
I'm a very lucky girl. I've got a Tootsie Roll Pop.
This is some of the rarest one-of-a-kind material in the country. Unless my collection is saved, preserved, and put somewhere else, no one is going to see this again.
You love Tootsie Roll Pops.
Real one? No, I don't. This is terrible. The one we want is Caught in the Middle.
Hey, cuz, you all rat tail sharp. How about giving us a few of them pennies?
One amazing find was Caught in the Middle, a color kinescope that was made by CBS in 1970. And as I'm watching it, there's Morgan Freeman.
I got things breaking for me. Pretty soon I'll be able to throw some pennies your way. Nice pennies.
Once it aired, it was never seen again, and nobody has a copy anymore, and I was able somehow to get one. But just transferring it and fixing the audio is one thing. I have to put touches up to a lot of the video, so when I'm playing it here, you can see how dark it is in spots. I have to then lighten it up, and now it's starting to look like something.
And the man's just waiting to blow you away. And if he ever gets the chance, bye-bye, black boy.
There's so much history there that needs to be documented correctly. And hopefully, if I can bring it to the public, that will happen.
Is this box number 20 or number 20?
This is ridiculous.
I see a number.
This all has to be taken out. More 16 millimeter. This is 45 years of collecting, and now I have to figure out how to finance saving it all. That's the big question. Because there's a lot of rare, one-of-a-kind items that need to be saved. Musty smell. So the key is to transfer it all now digitally, then store it all away. And my goal one day is to walk into a building and there is everything I have in little plastic containers on a wall, organized.
George, stop the machine. Stop the machine.
This film's so old it just breaks up in your fingers.
Can't you patch it together again?
Not a chance. Celluloid's only good for 20 years or so, and then it gets so brittle you can't hardly touch it.
You mean that we can't even see it? Now that we have it?
There's just nothing you can do about it.
Nothing you can do about it. Never had the world known a more wonderful way of recording knowledge. But now it was realized that it wasn't permanent, that half a century of history was about to decay out of existence.